Perfect. And then just one little caveat I like to give before these support groups is that we are not giving any medical advice. If you have any specific medical advice, please talk to your doctor. But Julie knows a lot about going back to school, and she's going to give us some really good advice. So, Julie, take it away again.
All right. Thanks, Sydney. Okay, so guys, whether your child is just diagnosed, just recently very much diagnosed, or you've been in this for a long time, which some people have, you're definitely in the right room. It doesn't stay the same. Type 1 diabetes doesn't stay the same for year to year. So going back to school can sometimes be a challenge. So what your child needs at 6 looks nothing like what it looks like at 16 or even 20. And so we're going to walk the whole road together from kindergarten through college so you can see just not what's coming, but how to prepare for it before you're standing in the middle of the road and hopefully not getting run over. Okay, so a quick roadmap of the next 40 minutes or so. We're going to move through 4 stages in order. We're going to do elementary, middle, high school, and a little bit of college because each stage needs to build on the one before it. So college gets the most time tonight, or the most attention a little bit because it's the biggest shift of all, but we are going to be definitely focusing on the other three too. Um, at every stop, we'll use the same lens, what's practical, what's emotional, and what specific things you as a parent can do to hand over a little more ownership to your child. So keeping the three-part frame in mind, we'll come back to it at the very end. All right. All the slides tonight live inside one of these three buckets. Practical is the easiest to plan for. It's your paperwork, your supplies, your staff training. Emotional is the one we skip over fastest as parents because we're so busy managing the logistics of diabetes. But it actually drives so much. A child who feels like stigmatized within their diabetes manages worse. So, and autonomy is the thread that ties it all together. So, independence at 18 doesn't happen by itself. So that independence of them leaving high school and moving on to college or a career, it just doesn't happen by themselves. It's built with one small deliberate handoff at a time, which starts early on in kindergarten. So we're going to keep this frame in mind as we move through each age group. All right, are we ready to go? Okay. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about elementary school. And we go over some developmental steps of each age, just so you guys know the kind of the paramount things that you might be facing, both from a growth standpoint and a diabetic standpoint. So let's just start at the beginning with elementary. Your child is almost entirely reliant on the adults around them for everything, not just their diabetes. It's you, the school nurse, the classroom teacher. That's really developmentally appropriate. And a 6-year-old shouldn't be making a lot of big life decisions, including like insulin dosing or anything like that. But it's also the stage where the seeds of everything that come later get planted. So if you start young, you're going to end up with some really nice full plants at the end. Okay. So how your child talks to your body, how comfortable they are asking for help, how normal or scary diabetes feels today is all part of it. So small choices will echo for years. So you're going to see that this is the first time that a child's experience in being the kid is different in a room full of peers. I got diabetes at 5, and I do remember feeling that very keenly all through my elementary years and sometimes even into high school. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And my fine motor, or excuse me, the fine motor skills are still developing. So injections and finger tips are physical skills in progress. So they're also scary. Let's be honest. No kid wants to prick their own finger. I also remember that being a real sense of, or a real source of kind of conflict between my parents and I when I was younger. So just keep those things in mind that those are developmentally appropriate things. Okay, so one of the first things, if you haven't done it already, is a 504 plan. It is your legal foundation here. A 504 is part of the American Disabilities Act, and it is a perceived disability. You can receive a 504 with a perceived disability. Now, obviously, type 1 diabetes is it's not a disability, but it is a diagnosis, and it's better if you can take a doctor's note into the school when you're going in there to make sure that that 504 plan has a little bit of teeth behind it. So that 504 plan spells out exactly what the school must do. All right. If you started early, 3 to 4 months isn't overkill. It's what lets a nervous new teacher feel ready. And it doesn't stop in the nurse's office. Emergencies happen in gym class, in the art room, in the bus. So every adult who spends time, supervised or unsupervised, with your child needs to know the basics. So maybe giving a one page cheat sheet. It sounds really small, but a teacher, they've told me as a counselor that it's very useful for them to have that one page cheat sheet. Now the 504 is given to all of the teachers, and that is kind of a cheat sheet for them. But when you have a classroom of 30 kids and 6 or 7 of them have a 504, flipping through that book isn't necessarily an easy thing. Okay. If you hit any resistance getting that 504 plan approved, the ADA, American Diabetes Association, has some legal advocacy staff who can help you with that should you need it. I do want to put in a note as a counselor here, just kind of speaking on behalf of school staff. We want to make things realistic because school staff is frequently burdened with a lot of different things, especially elementary school teachers in the middle of the day. So making it a graphic, making something that they can just look at that's easy for them to know, making sure they have the supplies in their classroom, and going over things gently and kindly helps go a really long way. I know it's a very scary thing to send your child off to school, maybe for the first time with diabetes or maybe the fifth time. It's still scary every time, and you don't know what to expect because teachers change every year. Okay. Make sure that you have things like glucagon or a Basquimi on site and it's non-expired. I'm going to say that a million times, non-expired, and that staff do know how to use it and when to use it. Also, make sure that that staff knows what symptoms might look like. And if they have a CGM or a pump, ask whether those readings can be shared with a nurse or a school app. It can start to catch some of those lows and even highs as they come along. That is more difficult for school staff to have, and there might be some liability revolving around that at some schools. So I just want to caveat that. But just make sure they have everything they need and it's all up to date. I cannot tell you how many times our nurses have pulled things like insulin that's a couple years old because, you're in elementary school for 6 years and we forget to get new supplies there. So just make sure things are up to date and ready to go. By the way, we'll be answering questions at the end. So if you have any questions, just write them down and we'll go ahead and take care of those at that time. Okay, so the emotional part. It's it's really tempting to rush past it. Um, and especially with young kids and to say, look, it's not that hard. It's just a quick poke. You'll barely feel it. But if any of you are in the health field or you've ever worked with young students or young children, even giving them a vaccinations can be traumatic. And so imagine having to do that every day, or just a finger poke. They just don't like it. So it's a completely real fear. And when you dismiss it, it teaches them not to bring those feelings to you. And that's something we really want to do. It's okay for them to say, I'm scared of this. Okay. And you would validate that. And then you would problem solve. Well, how can we make it feel better? Maybe we can numb your finger with some ice. Maybe we can play a game revolving around it. How can we make it feel better for the students? This is also the same age is also the age when a child clocks that they're not quite like everyone else in the room. And I know I've talked about that. My story is it's kind of hilarious, but it wasn't at the time. I also happened to have a rather large birthmark on one of my legs. And I remember being on the playground at school. And I remember telling somebody, they asked me what the birthmark was, and I said, I don't know. And then they said, well, I've noticed sometimes you leave the classroom for certain things. And I said, well, I'm a diabetic. And then they wouldn't play with me anymore. And I know that's so out of bounds, but they wouldn't play with me anymore because they thought it was contagious because some children think that diabetes is contagious. So teaching your child to have language and age-appropriate words for explaining that to classmates if they want to. So just please keep that in mind that this is a scary time for them and for other students. They don't understand things. So just remembering that there's a bunch of people in the room and we want to make sure that everyone is honored through that so that bullying doesn't occur. So we want to normalize it, but at the same time say, hey, I have to do some things that are a little bit different. Okay. And that bullying and some of those emotional things they're linked to worse glucose control. not just hurt feelings. So giving your child simple words, my body needs a little help, doing something everyone else's body does automatically, it puts them in control of the story. So just keep that in mind when we think about the emotional part. All right, building autonomy during this age. At 6 and in elementary school, it doesn't necessarily look like complete independence. It looks like little small choices that you let them think they're fully controlling. Which finger do we poke? Which arm? Whether to check before or after breakfast. I know that sounds little and it doesn't sound like much, but it's the beginning of a habit of them having a voice in their own care. And as a counselor, I can tell you by the time they reach high school, if they don't have a voice, things become exponentially more difficult as they're moving into real life. So please make sure that they have that little voice starting then. Start teaching them the vocabulary of their symptoms. My parents always used to say, "Are you shaky?" And even to this day, my 80-year-old mother still says to me, "Are you feeling shaky?" So teach them that vocabulary that you can use within your family. Um, how does it feel? Build that self-awareness that they'll rely on for the rest of their life. Make sure they understand the feelings in their body. And this is just good advice for just even social learning skills, things like that. Make them have a voice in what they're feeling. Okay. I think the other thing that I like is staying calm when you're talking about diabetes. I know it's so scary, but it's just another part of the day. So when you talk calmly to a child, you're raising a calmer child. And then praise noticing and telling you something. Praise that. Hey, thanks for bringing that to me. I appreciate it. So now we can work on this together. I know it's so scary as a parent, and you look at a meter and it says, we're at 320, and you're kind of like, oh my gosh. But just say, hey, we got something to work on today. How can we work on this together? Or man, you're at 110. Holy cow. That's I'm glad that you did your own finger prick. Or I know most of us wear CGMs, but you never know when somebody's doing a finger prick. So, okay. So just please keep that in mind, that they need to own what they're feeling. We need to have language, and then you need to praise them for speaking up and telling you how they feel. All right. So moving on from elementary school, we're moving into the most fun but challenging years, middle school. Okay. Um, there are two huge, enormous changes that happen in middle school: puberty and a completely new school structure. Hormones make blood sugar really a lot less predictable. And that's nobody's fault because sometimes you can think you're managing it really awesome and it is just not happening. Okay. Make sure you say that out loud, but don't make it an excuse for your child. Make sure you say, hey, I understand that things are a little rough right now. I've noticed you eating right. I've noticed you, exercising or whatever you want to do and testing. And I know things look a little funky, but we can work through this together. Okay. Um, at the same time as that, they're suddenly navigating 6 or 7 different teachers and a social dynamic that, I'm not going to lie, is difficult. A lot of judgment, a lot of peer pressure, things like that. So, and they have real chunks of their day happen without an adult too. So they've moved from, having all this care and being watched over to now kind of out of sight, out of mind in a way. So just remember that as they're moving into middle school, that is going to affect some things. They get more self-conscious. Their peer opinion starts to carry way more weight than parent instruction, so you can get some rebelliousness. And this is the first stretch, where they manage some stuff out of sight alone. Just even getting to class, okay, those kind of things. So remember, these are all developmentally normal things happening in middle school. Um, so the 504 plan, we're going to start with that. It worked really great in elementary school. Yay. And now it falls all apart because you have 7 or 8 different teachers, not to mention coaches, not to mention club leaders, things like that. So you've got a whole bunch of people now in on the game. And you need to revisit that specifically for that kind of structure. If you can, I suggest revisiting that at the beginning of the school year, contacting your counselor or whomever writes 504s in your school or manages 504s, and asking them for a reevaluation, even if they don't necessarily need it. But moving from maybe 3 teachers, you've got your art special or your PE special, to 7 or 8. and other people is going to be a lot. So we want to make sure that they have a good cheat sheet. And how does this get covered during substitute days? You know, how does information travel between periods? You know, passing time. It's tight in middle school, so build an explicit permission to get to a locker or a nurse without being marked tardy. Those kind of things. And don't assume that the same nursing coverage exists. A lot of districts have to stretch their nurses across multiple buildings at this level, and sometimes even at the elementary school level. So confirm it directly rather than assuming continuity from elementary school. The other thing I want to bring up is you want to make sure, because standardized testing does start entering the field here in a little bit, becomes much more important in high school. So you want to bring up things like extra breaks when necessary during testing, extended time if needed. I find that most diabetics don't need extended time. They just want extra breaks where they stop the clock if there's things like that. So just keep that in mind. I also know as an athlete myself that this was an important time where my parents started looping in coaches a lot because I was doing things after school all the time. And if the coach knew it was going to be an especially rough day, not as much as high school, but middle school can have some rough days, like they were going to do something rough, they might contact my parents or they might tell the student, hey, we're going to have a kind of a rougher practice right now, so I just need you to be aware of that and watch your blood sugar, make sure that your CGM is charged and you have access to your phone, things like that. Okay. Um, all right. And the other thing that I'm noticing happening is this is the age of phones. Not gonna lie. And at this time, what we see is a lot of schools are now going to not having phones in the school during the day. So you will definitely want to have that written in the 504 that they have permission to have access to their phones in the classroom, and but at the same time honor the teacher's request that they not be on Instagram, TikTok, things like that. So just maybe talking to your student about appropriate phone usage for their diabetes. Okay, emotionally, you're going to hear the phrase a lot, I'm just tired of dealing with this. And you're going to hear it more and more. And that is diabetes distress. It's diabetes like burnout. They're just tired of it. And it's not the same as poor management. It's just a completely normal emotional response to a relentless, constantly stressful task that sits in the back of their mind. Additionally, privacy also becomes non-negotiable for a lot of kids at this age. If any of you have middle schoolers, you will notice that they start huddling in their rooms, and being in their rooms a lot. And it's very important for them to have that privacy. So sometimes being asked to do things in front of a class or anyone else can feel absolutely humiliating, even if nobody says a word. And you won't even figure out. I would frequently get kids in my office just completely upset, finally get out of them. Well, I was asked to do this, or I had to take my inhaler, or whatever it might be. And they're so embarrassed about it. Okay. So you need to watch for things like withdrawal during this time, eating lunch alone, skipping activities, um, not testing, doing things that normally they would do when they were younger because now they're wanting that privacy and they don't want to draw attention to themselves. So, and watch those for signs of bullying, since kids at this age often don't report it directly, and bullying is kind of rampant in middle school. So really watch for signs that something is not going well. And then remember that the body is already changing in ways that can feel out of control before you add diabetes on top of it. It can feel like to a middle schooler, like double whammy. So just please keep remembering that. And then building autonomy during this age. This is the age where you deliberately start transferring tasks one at a time, not all at once. But usually the first one that we might discuss is carb counting, if you do carb counting. Um, and that's a good first handoff. And then dosing decisions would come after that. They're going to be in school. They need to be able to dose or bolus for something when they're high, or they need to, or if they're like, hey, my friends are passing around M&Ms, because that definitely happens in middle school, as well as other kind of things. They need to know what they need to do to take care of that, but not over bolus. So really working with them on dosing decisions is a great time now. And then start changing your language. Swap your instructions for maybe questions. What do you think that number means to you? Um, instead of things like just take two more units. So you're building that autonomy rather than compliance. Okay. Additionally, peer connections happen a great deal now. So I loved, and I don't know, I loved diabetes camp. That was one of my favorite things, was being able to go and be myself, and everyone else there was the same. So that might be a very great way to build that independence and that confidence in their being a diabetic and being able to handle this on their own. So think about things like that. And it can do more for their motivation than anything else you say because peers matter way more than parents. And when you get pushback from them, which you will, try to resist reading it as a failure. A 12-year-old will test your boundaries around their own diabetes, and they are doing exactly what 12-year-olds are supposed to do. So maybe thinking about reframing your relationship into more of a questioning mode and keeping in mind in the back of your mind, hey, they are going through a part where they want some more privacy and they want to have a little bit of independence. So time to really start building on that autonomy. All right. Now we're moving into high school. So what are the hallmarks for high school developmental? It is a lot of change in 4 years, and we see it all the time. We used to joke that as a counselor, a freshman counselor, we would call them, instead of a counselor, we would call them drama interventionists. But by the time they're a senior counselor, it's completely different. You are actually working with a young adult who is hopefully getting ready to leave. And that is so, it's so much change through all 4 years. So just keep that in mind. They start driving. They take on jobs. They have harder classes, APs, IBs, honors classes, and they have real unsupervised time. And these all show up together at once, not to mention some significant peer pressure, which can bring in a whole other wrinkle. Unfortunately, we're talking about maybe some substances that they shouldn't be getting into, things like that. So there's so much that goes into this in high school. It is a great time of growth. It is a great time of joy. And you just kind of have to roll with it and hope that you're giving them some autonomy will help them make some great decisions. The countdown to leaving home actually starts here in high school, and college conversations need to start happening. So that's why we're going to spend some time on that just a little bit tonight. And it should start happening for diabetics before senior year. Okay, and we'll describe why in just a little bit. So, and I do want to emphasize that teens increasingly want to be seen as a teenager first and a diagnosis second. And I can speak to that. And I know it was a long time ago. If you haven't figured out, I've had diabetes for over 50 years. So that was a long time ago that I was a teenager, but I do remember wanting it to be completely secret. I did not want people to know because I didn't want them to ever feel sorry for me or anything else. So I wanted to be a teenager doing my own things first. So please keep that in mind. And that can get you in a little bit of trouble keeping things secret. So, all right, practical. Um, we start talking more about with the 504s, things like exams and standardized testing. Um, so those are already stressful enough without a blood sugar swing in the middle of one. So you need to make sure that your 504 plan explicitly covers testing days. Again, things like extra time, being able to stop the clock when needed, carrying food and drink, having to have a phone or something else with you at all times during testing. Those are things that College Board and like the state are prepared to handle in one form or another. Sports get more demanding here too. As we talked about that, a coach or a trainer who understands how a hard practice affects insulin needs a real safety is a real safety asset, not just nice to have. So making sure that your coach is aware, hey, this is going to be a difficult practice. And I can tell you a story about me in college in swimming that somebody ignored that. Um, but it's really important that they communicate that to your athlete also and your student, okay? On driving, the guidance and with CGMs, we don't check glucose very often before we get behind the wheel. But I drive my son back to New York almost every year for college, and I keep an eye on my blood sugar because sitting too long too can have negative effects too. So Just make sure that you're checking that blood sugar and telling them to check their blood sugar, and they shouldn't be low and start driving. Everyone reacts to lows differently. Some of us can go low and some of us cannot. So just making sure that they know where their threshold is and where you work with them to say, hey, that's not okay. You can't drive during that time. Okay. Um, and then let's see. Starting now, not the summer before college, have your teens start to learn their own history, their diagnosis date, their current dosage, their symptoms, what pharmacy they use, insurance basics. They are going, and that's just for any student, not just for diabetics, but that's for any student because they're going to need it soon. And it shouldn't be a scramble, but especially for diabetic students, it's kind of like me advising an athlete, a high school athlete, and when they're going to college, it's difficult and you need to have those things in place. So really starting to think about those. Emotional. There's a real tension for a lot of teens between wanting to be normal and independent and a condition that demands daily, inescapable attention. It's hard. So that tension is really exhausting and burnout is common. So watch for skipped checks of their blood sugar or data that mysteriously disappears from an app or high, the up and down. Watch all of that. Okay. Also watch for a I'm fine that's said really quickly. Okay. It's worth saying plainly, you know, the research shows that teens who carry type 1 diabetes have a higher risk of anxiety and depression. So doing those mental health check-ins is kind of important and it deserves regular attention just as much as an A1C. So please do not discount that. I know that that A1C is right there in your face and it's very tangible, but those mental health concerns can really drive some significant issues. So make sure you attend to that also and get them help if they need it. I used to joke with my doctor at Barbara Davis Center. I would say, which came first, anxiety or diabetes? It's kind of like the chicken and the egg. Which is it? And I'm not sure, but I can tell you that a lot of diabetics have anxiety or depression, and it's worth you making sure that you check with your child all the time. So again, they want to be a teenager first, not a diagnosis, and that's a healthy instinct, not defiance. So please keep that in mind because they're going to be defiant about a bunch of other stuff. Kind of roll with the punches and move from there. Okay. And then building autonomy here. In middle school, it was about moving from manager to coach for you guys. High school is about moving from coach to consultant, somebody that's available on request, not running everything else. When something goes wrong, and it will, let them learn some of those lessons. Okay. And I know how scary that is, but you have to learn some of those lessons to know how to make it right. Now, I know that this is something you don't want to mess around with, but it's okay for somebody to run 200 for a few hours and then say, what did you do? Or how do we want to handle this? Or what did you learn from that? Okay. We definitely don't want them at like 500 for days on end. That's not what we want. Okay. But I'm just saying, let them handle some of those and let them come up with their own solutions. Um, when something does go wrong, let it teach on its own. A rough afternoon after a skipped dose usually makes the point better than a lecture. And again, as we've talked about, begin the college conversation now, even in freshman year, even if it's just what do you think you'll need to be able to do this on your own so that you know and they give you an opinion. This is what I need. Some students, even students without a chronic illness, are not ready for college or moving on to their own. So it's always important to start and say, hey, what are you going to need to do this? All right. And it reframes the goal as a skill building rather than a cliff that they hit. So just keep checking in, keep it low pressure and predictable rather than a surprise inspection. And I tell all of my clients this when working with students. It doesn't matter whether they're diabetic or not, let them make the decisions. And I know it's hard. We've been running, their lives for a long time, but they need to start making some of those decisions so they feel like they're successful. All right. Now, college. This is the biggest shift. Um, it's not just a bigger place with harder classes. It's the first time the institution is legally required to talk to your student instead of you. You lose all of your say here. FERPA, which stands for the Family Education Rights Privacy Act, says that once a student applies to college and turns 18, they're the only ones with access to their educational records. So that includes 504s and things like that. Unless they decide to waive FERPA, you have no rights to say anything. Plus, colleges like to listen to students, they don't like to listen to parents. So please keep that in mind. So everything that we talk about here forward is in service of one goal, not independence overnight, but a strong enough support team that your student can lean on and eventually run themselves. So it's not them doing it by themselves, it's having a team and creating that team themselves. Real quickly, we talked about FERPA. The college won't talk to you. They want to talk to your student. All right. Um, and that's really jarring for a lot of parents who spent 12 years as the person who helped through this and did all of this. But that's the job of the college is to kind of make them independent. They're supposed to be independent at that point. They're living on their own. They're making decisions that maybe you made in the past, okay? Your job has now become a partner, okay? And I want to be honest about something from a parent who's been through all this. Somebody told me this. They said, give your student real capacity to advocate for themselves and expect that some days it will genuinely be a fight. They may resist your involvement even when they need it. And so your move isn't to back off entirely, it's to give them autonomy to make absolutely sure they know what they're doing as their supporter, not their manager. So we want to give them that independence. Okay. Um, I guess I'm going to talk about building the list very quickly. Very quickly. You start assembling a team, excuse me, and you ask your current endocrinologist directly whether they can advocate on your student's behalf and write documentation what the school will need. And ask about a referral near campus if they're staying local. Have your student build their own written list of who's on their team and what questions they need to get answered. Keep a copy for yourself, but let it be their list. Some students specifically look for another student with type 1 to room with through College Diabetes Network or Diabetes Link chapter. And then put together a physical kit for the dorm. Plus, make sure that the people who need to know, an RA, a roommate, health center, actually know security, what's going on. Okay. Um, so campus visits, I'm going to go over this real quickly, but there's 6 offices that you need to really attend to if you go on a campus visits. Um, you need to go to Disability Accessibility Services for 504. You need to do Student Health Center. What do you do for emergencies? Res Life, who helps take care of this? Dining Services. What are your hours and do you have food available at all times? Campus Security, who's the direct number and how they handle wellness checks, and mental health services. What's their availability like and what's their experience with chronic illness and mental health? So, and then you need to do those during your campus visit so you know if a school is going to be right for you and that they can provide all those services. Okay. Some things parents don't think of, even if their child isn't a diabetic, um, think about how far campus is and how they're going to get back and forth. That actually can matter a bit. Let's see. And they have to be able to get home fast if something goes wrong. What insurance networks do they have out there? I'm in Colorado, my son's in New York. They have completely different insurance networks, and that's been kind of a little bit of a nightmare. So imagine it with diabetes. So I want you to think about that and how do they get their supplies? Um, housing requests are often more flexible, so they might be able to get their own room, but do you want them to have their own room? How about campus geography and climate? Heat can affect diabetes, so can cold. Connectivity. Believe me, I had a friend who the school didn't have great connectivity on their campus, so their CGM and all those things were constantly going wrong. Okay. And then if you're at school in like Michigan and you're sitting on one of the Great Lakes and you have a blizzard and the power goes out, do you have food in a refrigerator that's not going to spoil? How are you going to manage that? I know it's a lot to think about, but at least you can talk to your student about those things. Okay, and then this list is just basically things you might want to ask for in accommodations. I think you can look over that and see what it looks like. I don't want to go too long. I want people to be able to answer questions here. But some of these even surprised me. I didn't realize that parking, having access to close parking from the dorms could be something, and having access to have a car because some campuses are like freshmen can't have cars on campus. So thinking about those things, you want your student to have a car in case they need to go get emergency services or see a doctor off campus. So just things to think about. How are they going to get food? Some of those dining service halls close at night. How are they going to get food? What if they are in a blizzard and they're stuck in their room? How are they going to eat? These are just things to think about and logistics to work out with your student, letting them make some decisions. Okay, and then financial, there are some scholarships available. You do need to build supply cost into the overall cost of attendance, not just tuition and housing. That does need to go in there, including travel. And then just make sure that your health plan covers insulin in certain pharmacies, especially in student health. Okay. And then autonomy, I think we talked a little bit about this. All three threads come together at once, and you need to agree on a communication plan. One of the mothers I spoke to is a good friend of mine. She said we had a communication plan instead of because she had her CGM and she could check her phone all the time and see where her CGM was. But her daughter got really mad at her, so all she did now is she would give, if she started going low, she would put a thumbs up or a thumbs down. That was their communication. That's all that had to happen so that at least the mother knew that the child was on top of this. Okay. This is going to take practice and there's going to be a lot of friction, but you can work this out as a young adult. Okay. So I just want you guys to understand that you don't have to do, every family in this room is at a different point on the same road, and every stage generally does look completely different from the one before it. Um, the through line never changes, though practical of support, emotional support, and handing over a little more independence each year on purpose really helps. So showing up tonight, asking questions, thinking ahead, that's already the work. And I know you guys have got this, and so do they. So let's remember they do have this. Okay. This slideshow will be provided. I think Sydney, we're gonna provide it, correct? Yep. But here are some resources. And I will tell you that as a diabetic, I wish that somebody had I can't even imagine my parents who many, many years ago, how they had to learn that independence and that autonomy, letting me go. Because we didn't have CGMs, we didn't have things like that. We didn't have pumps. So if my parents could do it and I'm still here today and still doing pretty good, you guys can certainly do it. With all the wonderful advantages that you have, you can do this and make sure that your student comes out even better. And diabetics are living long, long lives now because of the efforts of the doctors and people who went through all of this. So you guys have got this. And then lastly, again, there's a QR code there if you'd like to scan it that actually takes you directly to a resources page that I put together, which I will share with Sydney. And then I do consulting on the side. So if you need any help with your type 1 diabetic or any other siblings navigating the transition to college, you are more than welcome to contact me and I will help you out. And you can mention that you saw me here and I will help you navigate through that. So I think we open it up for questions. If you have a question, you can unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and I'll be happy to help you out.
Also, feel free to drop your questions in the chat if you don't feel comfortable unmuting.
Let's see. Ah, somebody has a fourth grader. It's a great age. So, and as I can also tell you, if anyone, second grade, oh, yay, starting a new school. Congratulations and good luck. So, and I can tell you if anyone has any questions about, counseling or how counselors handle 504s, anything like that, had plenty of experience in that too. So if you have any of those kind of logistics, I can tell you from an honest opinion what that looks like in the schools and things like that.
Could I ask a question?
Please go ahead.
I have my name listed as Freya because I thought this was a support group for the kiddos, but I'm actually Jamie.
Hi.
But so I'm a foster parent, and Freya is placed with us, and she has type 1 diabetes. Um, when she was originally, or when she was very first with us, we gave her the receiver and like she got to have eyes on the numbers, like as they came in. And we noticed she was like so fixated on like watching her glucose numbers that I just eventually took it so that she couldn't see it and kind of was like, go be a kid, like we'll deal with this for a little while. She's 10 years old, if that's relevant. Um, how can we build up a healthy relationship with watching her glucose numbers so that she can both start to develop that independence and also not have to be anxious about it all day every day?
Okay, thanks. That's a great question. So, and I can tell you when I first got my first CGM, they even warned me. They said you will watch it constantly and you need to figure out a way to not do that. And even still, I've had it for years and I still can be fixated on it at certain times. I think that this is a conversation. I know she's 10 and that's still young, right? But I think this is a conversation where you start saying, what would be most comfortable to you? Um, because and explain, kids are resilient and they do understand a lot more than we give them credit for sometimes. And I think it would be in your best interest to maybe say, hey, tell me why you think you like to watch it so much. And tell me what you think about that. Do you think that that's good for you? Do you think that might hurt you? Let her answer those questions and have her have some autonomy in that. And what does that make you feel like, knowing what it's like? Because, there might be a little bit of underlying anxiety going on with that. Um, and then maybe you could work out together a plan where you can say, okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give it to you for an hour after dinner, and you can watch and see what happens. And then after that, I'm going to take it back. And you just kind of work your way into um, a slow progression of letting her manage that and look at it and understand that some of these things are normal. I think it's okay to normalize, like, if you eat a big dinner with a lot of carbs and then you have a piece of pie on top of it, you're going to go high and normalizing those type of things. Or if you do a lot of exercise, if you're outside running around, you're going to go low. And just talking to her about how that all works together, but also giving her the power to say, hey, this is how I feel about it, and this is what I want to do. And you can definitely, as a parent, sometimes we have to say, I think that that's a great idea for maybe a little bit later in the future, but how can we start a little smaller? So you're not taking that power away from them, but at the same time, you're kind of trying to minimize if they're really gonna, like, I want to watch it 24/7 is what I want to do. All right. Does that make sense a little bit?
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. I'm wondering too, with school coming up, how that transition will go. Do you think like at age 10, like just from a practicality standpoint, like will she be having the receiver and watching it throughout the school day, or is that like something that the nurses or teachers will do, or how does that usually look?
And I can't speak to every school or every school district. That's the problem. Some schools will want her to have that, and then some may actually work with you so that somebody else has that. It's just a lot of responsibility and liability for somebody else to take that on. In other words, the schools, yeah, a nurse is one thing because a nurse is more qualified than a teacher having it. So a teacher making a decision about, I mean, all of us can see a down arrow, we can hear the alarm, we can see that or an up arrow or double up arrows or whatever it may be. But I think that is something you're going to have to sit down when you have, do you have a current 504? Do you know?
No, the school situation gets a little bit complicated too. So
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. I think you're going to have to go in there and when you guys you're going to have a request a 504 meeting at the beginning of the year. And I know there's also medical plans that they can do, which will talk about certain pieces of this. And as a foster parent, you're kind of stuck in a little bit of a unique situation too. So, I think it would be best if you get everybody on board as soon as possible and say, these are the issues. This is what we have to do a plan for. And we want to make sure that not only are we attending to her blood sugars, but we're also attending to that anxiety revolving around her blood sugars and see what they can come up with that can be feasible for the school to do because there is that piece too. There's only so much time in the day. And when teachers have 30 kids in a classroom, and like I said, they've got 10 504s and two IEPs or whatever may happen, that's a lot to differentiate on and watch. So really seeing what you guys can come up with the best plan. And maybe that is part of your plan with your foster daughters. You say, okay, during the school day, that's your time to watch it. But when you come home, it comes to me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's not none of this. It's so nuanced and it's so different for everybody. And I wish you the best of luck in the new school year. But I would definitely say work politely with your school, because it makes a big difference if you don't work politely with your school. Does that make sense? So, but also watch out for them violating things. It's kind of a balance. So,
Polite and firm when needed.
yeah, exactly. That's keep those boundaries, I guess is what I'm saying. So, thanks a lot. Did anybody else have any other questions?
I have a quick question. With our little guy starting at a new school, because our old school got real familiar with Colt and all of his stuff. But is it, I guess, overkill to request? Because they're not back in the office till August 10th, which is a week before school starts. Is it overkill to like request to sit down with like the school nurse, his counselor, and whoever his teacher is going to be? So we have a plan, we're all on the same page. I mean, I don't want to be like the helicopter mom at the same time. They don't know Colt yet. So
Okay. Do you have a copy of his current 504 from his old
I,
school?
I do. Yeah.
Okay. Make sure on day one that it's there.
Okay. Okay.
If it's not already, because sometimes when records come over, it comes over with them.
Yep. I've talked to this old school. They said they'll send it.
Okay, great. Make sure it goes with them.
Okay.
And then I think I would have parents contacting me on the first or second day of school and say, "Hey, I was wondering if we could, we just switched schools and I would really love to talk to you guys and have a 504 meeting regarding his T1D."
Okay. Okay.
And I don't think there's any, and you just do it politely because I am in a very unique position to be a diabetic and to also be a
Yeah.
counselor, right? And
Awesome.
so
Yeah.
I see it come from both sides. I
Right.
can see both sides of it where you're worried about it, but at the same time, I also know that counselors are completely overwhelmed sometimes at the beginning of school,
Right.
especially when you get to high school and middle school.
Okay.
Very much so. So just a real polite email saying, "Hey, we're coming over. I'd really love to sit down and chat about his 504 with you guys, and maybe review it." Because there's a difference between just chatting about it and actually doing a formal review.
Right. Exactly.
So make sure that if you just want to chat, that's fine, but you can't make changes if you're just chatting.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
That's okay. Yeah, we'll do that then for
And I
sure.
would definitely contact his teachers and say, "Hey," and in the resources that I showed you guys, there's one of my friends made an infographic and it's talking about the college transition for her child, but that
Mhm.
can easily be manipulated and you can run it through Claude or whatever for your own child and put their own symptoms in there and things like that. And sometimes I find that really helpful when I was, when I was a counselor, if I could just turn it over my notebook and there was an infographic
Perfect. Yeah.
about my student and because I know a low for me looks different than a low for like maybe Sydney does.
Totally. Yeah,
So,
exactly. And to the
Is
other
it
mom, Freya's mom, I think it was.
yes.
What we did last year, and it worked really well, is we added the school nurse on their iPad to his CGM. So she kept an eye on that from her end. And then our teacher just had his phone during the day so he couldn't mess with it. But had her phone right there on her desk so that she could see it, but it wasn't the focus. And then the school nurse would run in and grab it. She was on top of it. But that way they both had it. Colt didn't have to worry about the phone. That was just something we did. It took some finagling to figure out what worked for our situation, but that did work for us.
Yeah. So, and
Yeah,
just keep in mind, I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say I hadn't even considered like having it on the school iPad. That seems like a great tip.
Yeah.
And is it okay if I add something about the 504 plan too?
Hmm.
I was just going to mention, so we had a kiddo that lived with us and they moved from one school to another. And I got the impression this was like all messed up and not the right way that it should have happened. But the new school like had to like adopt the 504 plan. and there was like a transition period where like they had to make sure they could fit all the accommodations, and like they had to review it internally and like all of these things. And during that time where they were like quote unquote adopting the plan, it like took them a while to like actually start implementing things. So like I was just going to mention, maybe watch out for that too. Like if they don't, like, I don't even know how it works, but like if they don't sign it into law, if you will, like on day one, make sure that like all of those accommodations are being met like until it's like officially in place.
That's good
Yeah,
advice.
it
Thank
is.
you.
It's one thing to do a 504 for a child with ADHD, which in of itself is one thing, right? But it's not necessarily a life-threatening chronic illness, right? So I know my parents, we didn't even have 504s when I was growing up, but my mom would march in there and say, my child will be carrying candy in this classroom. And it's okay to say that and say and again, do it politely. They're under a lot of stress. Education is kind of on fire a little bit right now, unfortunately. And so I think just doing things politely and mistakes will get made, people will forget things, but maybe that's a good way to have like the iPad there. And I gotta be honest with you, when I'm somewhere, I turn my volume up on my CGM. I don't care how loud it is or how much it scares people. So, so anyway, other questions or suggestions?
One thing that has helped my daughter, she's fourth grade, not look at her phone is we use the sugar pixel and we put one in the classroom so she can actually look over and see her numbers. And I think for the teachers, we just tried it last year. It's a little too much data for the teachers, but it worked really well for her to see the data and not have to worry about anything. And she knew what her number was because our school doesn't use iPads.
Yeah.
And they refuse to follow her anyway. So I have two sugar pixels, one at the nurse's station and one in the classroom. That works super well.
Thank you for that suggestion. And I'm going to admit I'm old school. I don't even know what a sugar pixel is, and I've not seen one in a school because I don't work with elementary schoolers. I usually work with high schoolers.
It just
Um,
shows the number and it connects really easily to Dexcom or whatever. And it
Excellent.
shows the delta, like the change of the number. So you can see how
Okay.
fast it's rising or falling. Yeah. It looks like an alarm clock, so other kids don't even pay attention to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. That's great. Yeah, usually we had so many diabetics in the high school I was at. I was a diabetic, and our counseling assistant who ran our office was also a type 1 diabetic. We thought about starting a support group just within the school of diabetics, and because there's so much that goes with it, and in high school they're going through a lot of other things too. So we thought about starting a help group and talking to them about what we felt like in high school.
Yeah.
And so if you can, if there are other diabetic children in your school and they're willing to disclose that, or you find that out from parents, it might be worth it to start a support group if you can.
Yeah.
I mean, this is wonderful, but just having somebody close or having another student watch out for, somebody they can be a friend for, like, I'm not kidding you, diabetic camp was a lifesaver for me. Because back in my day, there were not that many diabetics. So,
Thank you very much for this. It's super
yes.
helpful.
Yeah, I know it was a lot of information coming at you guys, and we covered everything, all the way through college, but there are some significant transitions, and things you just need to be aware of. And I think that autonomy piece is really important. And I can tell you, just as a school counselor, we really push it in high school. Um, so we'll frequently have kids come out of middle school and is still really used to being X and handheld. And I would always tell them when they come to my office, they say, you know what? Day one, I'll hold your hand, but I start letting it go every day after that. And by the end, you are supposed to be able to walk out of here knowing what you need to do. So, any other questions, comments, suggestions? Those are some great suggestions. All right.
Well, thanks everyone. Thanks so much for joining. Thanks for the great conversation and the tips. That was all really amazing. I am going to be sending out an email within the next few days with Julie's info and her PowerPoint and all the resources she mentioned, so you'll be able to easily go back to that and get all the information. But for now, thank you guys so much for being here. We appreciate you, and I hope you all have a great rest of your night.
Thank you. You too.